If we don't consider autistic communication to be deficient or a deficit, then how do we account for the fact that so many people have had difficulty understanding autistic people? Well, they account for that by comparing autistic and non-autistic communication to any other different type of culture. So there are many different cultures in the world that value different ways of communicating, a different amounts of directness or indirectness, have different rules for what is polite or impolite. They have different standards for eye contact, so on and so forth. So because being autistic is a fundamental part of a person, back to our three-part definition of autism, and because it is a difference in our brains and the way that we experience and interact with the world, it makes sense that the communication that comes with that is a cultural difference. So because it is a cultural difference, that is great news, because that means that it's not impossible to understand other cultures and be able to communicate across them. So here is a basic overview of autistic social culture and communication styles. Well, first off, autistic people tend to be very straightforward and blunt. This includes children. The natural tendency for autistic folks is to prefer simple, straightforward, logical communication. No hints, no indirectness, no being expected to read between the lines or to ask for things in indirect ways. When others communicate with us, we tend to interpret things very literally. This can mean instructions are interpreted literally. This can mean that someone might not understand hyperbole, or if you're exaggerating. And it could also mean that there is a disconnect in a sense of humor. Autistic folks might not understand sarcasm, or they might not understand a joke, or they might understand it or pick up on it, but find it inappropriate or just not funny. Autistic folks tend to not do a lot of small talk. The things that are in the USA considered to be polite, saying how are you and just saying fine back, or talking about the weather. In general, autistic folks will prefer to talk about meaningful topics rather than that small talk. That can further manifest itself as perhaps talking about subjects that may be inappropriate for that set or setting, oversharing, info dumping, those sorts of things kind of fall into this preference for deep and meaningful talk and conversation rather than talking just for the sake of talking. A lot of these aspects that were just explained are areas of frequent miscommunication between autistic people and non-autistic people of all ages. That includes friends between one another, children and parents, your coworkers, things of that nature. So for adults, non-autistic people often view autistic folks as rude. The straightforward and blunt manner of communication, not beating around the bush. Some people find that to be a little brash and rude. But on the other side, autistic folks can sometimes unintentionally hurt other people with blunt words or with a tone, and that is not their intent, but that is the impact that happens. So that is actually valid. So these miscommunications and misunderstandings are what leads the majority of non-autistic folks, and especially like the medical model practitioners, to say that autistic folks are socially impaired or that the communication skills are deficient. But when we look at this through the lens of neurodiversity, and we consider that autistic folks are not intentionally rude, we're not out there just trying to be mean to people, when we consider the intent of all of that, we it takes into account that is it really rude to be honest? Is it really rude to prefer that people ask you directly instead of having to wait and guess about things? So this is autistic folks' own social norms and social culture. So when we understand more about our natural tendencies, that helps us understand another's intent and also to manage our own, the impact of the way that people communicate with us. So if you would like some tips for how to communicate with autistic folks, maybe you are a parent and you have an autistic child, or you have autistic friends or coworkers. So here are some tips that make communication successful there. One would be to be more direct. If you want something done, ask for it to be done. Don't hint at things. Don't beat around the bush. Don't expect someone to take your implied meaning. Say what you mean and mean what you say. So say if you have instructions, say everything you want them to know about it, even if you think it is obvious. They will let you know if they already know or if they don't need that information. But the more direct and honest and obvious you are, that is the better way to being understood.